After the last round of trade talks were postponed, Chinese and U.S. officials exchanged phone calls on Tuesday, reaffirming commitment to the Phase 1 trade agreement. Does this mean tensions are cooling, or was the call just a placeholder? And coming up later, as Shenzhen celebrates 40 years of extraordinary growth, was it just a warm-up? We look at China's plans to create an integrated economic zone in the south. Welcome to The Point, coming to you from Beijing. I'm Wang Guan, sitting in for Liu Xin. The U.S. Trade Representative and Treasury Secretary had a phone call with China's Vice Premier on Tuesday, reaffirming commitment to the Phase 1 U.S.-China trade agreement. The phone call comes after talks scheduled for August 15 were postponed by the Trump administration. So why did President Trump first cancel talks only to agree weeks later? Has something changed? Will Monday's call lead to more talks? To discuss all this, I'm joined by DINGLI, professor at Fudan University's Institute of International Studies in Shanghai, and Rick Dunham, co-director of the Global Business Program at Tsinghua University. Welcome, gentlemen. Professor Shen, let me go to you first. I want to be straightforward here. What do you think came out of the talks?
Well, presumably the two sides have discussed the implementation of the Phase 1 agreement. How much and how contractually China has been working with the U.S. To buy the stuff. And according to the U.S. government, the two sides have also discussed a number of other issues. For instance, the so-called China structural change to ensure greater protection of intellectual properties, and how to make American company to make their access to China's financial sector and agricultural sector easier, as well as how to assure the termination of the so-called forced technology transfer. I have not read the Chinese leak of this stuff, but I assume what the U.S. government has reported is true.
Rick Dunham in Washington, let me go to you. What do you think the two sides get out of the talks? I mean, why did they even talk amid escalating tensions?
Well, right now, I think the idea is just to keep hope alive, to keep the process going. It's important for Donald Trump between now and the presidential election to do two things. One is to seem to deliver for American farmers. The sanctions that have been levied by the U.S., the tariffs have hurt the farm economy. Farmers are big supporters of the president. So I think that's one. The second is that I think the administration wants to look tough on China because Donald Trump is saying that Joe Biden, his opponent, would be weak on China. So I think you're going to see a lot of harsh rhetoric.
Beijing,
I think
Biden,
you're going
right?
to see continuing sanctions. Yes, exactly. And so I think that those are the two goals right now. And whether there are talks or not talks, I think depend on the impulses, the feelings of President Trump from week to week. But I do think they want to keep hope alive. I do think they want to keep the process going, at least as long as the U.S. presidential election in November.
Well, trying to keep the lives, the hopes alive. But don't you think that the Trump administration is trying to use the trade talks and to frame, to sell the trade talks to his voters as a major accomplishment in his first 4 years, Rick?
Exactly. That's why he has to make sure it doesn't collapse. If everything collapsed, if China said we will not buy soybeans, we will not we will not abide by the agreement, that would hurt him. But I think at the same time, he believes that he wants to look tough on Huawei. He wants to look tough on Chinese companies with regard and government officials with regard to the South China Sea or Xinjiang or Hong Kong. So I think he's going to make life difficult on the Chinese government. There will be a cost of continuing this continuing discussion and continuing negotiation with Donald Trump and his administration.
Professor Shen, in Shanghai, from the Chinese side, we saw China's official media striking a, what I would say, a cautiously optimistic tone about the trade talks, saying that the atmosphere of talks was good, there was goodwill, and there was good implementation. What do you think Beijing wants to get out of the trade talks?
Well, largely, we want to see lots of dialogues. As the Chinese government recently have stated, we don't see dialogue. We need a dialogue. Wang Yi has stated that we need to have constructive dialogues while sharing differences aside. And the Vice Foreign Minister Le Yucheng has said he is ready for a China-U.S. dialogue. So this is probably the first dialogue which is actually scheduled at the beginning of this year on January 15th. So at a later stage, after basically half a year, the two sides would have a review meeting. How much we have done, how positively, what more we need to do in preparation for a possible negotiation for Phase 2 agreement. So now the two countries have been very close to the review meeting, but this is not the review talk. This is the talk for talk. This is a telephone call, regular call, to prepare for the final meeting. That meeting still has not happened. Trump needed, China needed, because we need to tell everyone that China-U.S. still have lots of common grounds, that they need to cooperate economically in a mutually beneficial way. Trump needs more tickets. China needs to assure the relationship between the two countries would not go weird.
Right. Nobody wants to see U.S.-China relations to decouple or derail. Other than the U.S. politicians, I guess, some of them. The U.S. administration, the Department of Commerce, has put 24 Chinese companies on an entity list that blocks U.S. companies from working with them due to their involvement in the South China Sea. This follows blacklisting over 30 firms associated with Huawei. So, Rick, in Washington, let me go to you. How can the U.S. issue all these sanctions while still pursuing a trade deal?
I would call this a new normal in U.S.-China economic ties. The Trump administration has said that China, while there is engagement in the past, has been unfair to American companies and has erected barriers. I think right now he is trying to turn things around where for China there will be a cost of continuing economic engagement with the United States. If Chinese companies want access to the U.S. market, they are going to have to pay a price, or the Chinese government will have to pay a price. Whether this is fair or not, we can debate. But I think that the Trump administration saw the relationship as being economically unfair over the past 2 decades and wants to fundamentally change it. And so these sanctions that are coming, I think will continue to come as long as Donald Trump is president, and to see how far China will go before it says no more engagement. Because I think ultimately both sides want engagement, but the Trump administration is trying to exact a very high price on Beijing.
Professor Shen, how do you look at all these sanctions against China? They're coming, not just by the week, but by the day.
Well, these are the two faces of the same coin. Trump needs votes, and he is in a bad shape, way behind Joe Biden. So he needs to tell American people, look, I have had a good meeting with Chinese side, so we are going to sell more agricultural products, wheat, soybean, so please vote for me. At the same time, he tried to tell American people it's because of those Chinese gigantic construction company. They have done terrific work in South China Sea. They have built hundreds of big seaports around the world. They have took our job, and we need to punish them. So we need to tell American people, even though I have not taken those construction jobs back home, at least I would make them unable to get more job. So by striking this kind of 24 Chinese companies and also moving Chinese market in order to import American products, he is trying to do win-win, winning 2 times at one time.
Well, what about Foreign Minister and State Councilor Wang Yi's statement in Italy when he was meeting with Italy's external foreign minister? He said that China has no intention to engage in a new Cold War with the U.S. Actually, China is firmly against any type of Cold War. It would do nobody any good. do you think the U.S. is likely to heed Wang Yi's calls?
Well, it depends upon how we would look at the definition, what constitutes the definition of Cold War. Cold War actually has certain hot war in Korea and in Vietnam. I don't think the U.S. has any interest in waging a war with China, massively slowing around nuclear weapon or high-tech weapon that would bring huge harm to China while absorbing huge harms for America itself. The U.S. does not want to have this kind of hot war, which is a part of the old Cold War. The U.S. want to launch a new type of Cold War without having a massive military war, but bring huge amount of jobs back home by hurting Chinese market, hurting a market of every other place. For this, the U.S. is pushing the envelope in beating Chinese companies, listing them in the Commerce Department's blacklist in order to make this company not to have job, not to have a contract. Therefore, American can rise again, American can be great again, and they would get the job that China is unable to get. This is, in my view, America's new Cold War.
Well, Rick, what do you think? How do you look at Wang Yi's message of not, willing to engage in a Cold War with the U.S.?
Well, I agree. It is not in China's interest, and China has more to lose than the United States if there were a new Cold War, an economic Cold War. I think that the definition of a new Cold War, though, is not the old hot war with Vietnam and Korea. I think it would be economic decoupling. And that would be bad. That would be bad for the global economy. It probably would hit China harder than the United States. But the idea would be to bypass China in the global supply chain and to isolate China, to make countries choose China or the U.S. and EU. And I don't think that's in China's interest. I think it would be bad for the global economy. It would lead to a lot of inefficiencies and a lot of tension. But I think that's what the threat is right now. And I think China does not want it. I think most in the U.S. don't want it. But I think that definitely the State Department and Secretary of State Pompeo would like to pursue that kind of strategy.
That would be really unfortunate. It will do nobody any good. That's all the time we have for the moment. Many thanks to Professor DINGLI at Fudan University and also Rick Dunham at Tsinghua University. Thank you both so much.